Chapter 3778. Their cultivation and awareness couldn't keep up with the rhythm of the battle. Wei Mian, who could see everything clearly with his powerful divine sense, was deeply worried. Yun Ruhan and the other four had amazing potential and progressed at lightning speed. But they were still in the earth-opening realm. They were 2 whole realms away from the heaven-breaking realm. It was already very difficult for them to persist until now. Everyone had wounds of varying sizes on their bodies. Especially Yun Ruhan, the main attacker. There was a bowl-sized bloody hole in his abdomen, and blood was gurgling out. His body couldn't hold on for much longer. Third young master. Wei Mian couldn't help looking at Chu Moli, unable to conceal the worry in his eyes. 7th young master and the others. What are their chances of winning? Most people in Carefree City thought that Chu Moli was weak and ill, and lived in seclusion. He was the weakest among the Carefree 7. But only the few core people knew how powerful and terrifying this third young master was. Even Wei Mian, who thought highly of himself, could make a few jokes in front of Mu Yen, and show the kindness of an elder when facing Luo Yu. But when facing Chu Moli, he couldn't help but tense up, feeling indescribable nervousness and awe. Chu Moli was also looking at the battlefield in front of him, and said indifferently, about 30%. What? Wei Mian's voice suddenly rose, and he didn't even care about his fear of Chu Moli. Isn't that equivalent to sending 7th young master and the others to their deaths? Chu Moli lowered his eyes slightly, and the corners of his mouth slowly hooked up into a deep curve. It's interesting to turn 30% into 100%, isn't it? To be able to make the impossible possible, that was the Xiao Yao sect. 33 inches the past, such a miracle could only be created with the help and explosion of the little junior sister. But they couldn't rely on the little junior sister forever, and they couldn't be a burden to the little junior sister forever. So, if they wanted to continue climbing higher, if they didn't want to be left far behind by the little junior sister, then they had to show their full potential. Ling Yuxing dodged Yawang's sharp claws with his ghostly movements. With the absolute space field fully activated, the consumption of his spiritual qi and physical strength was immeasurably huge. Moreover, he had to wander around to save the other disciples. At this moment he was already gasping for breath and his face was pale. Just then, a cry of alarm came from behind. 5th senior brother, be careful. Ling Yuxing's heart skipped a beat, and the cloud silk in his hand turned into a barrier. However, the huge impact sent him flying backward, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Kid, your speed is really fast. But now that I've exhausted my spiritual power, I'd like to see how a little mouse like you can escape from my palm. At this time, Ling Yuxing only felt as if his internal organs were overturned, and the smell of blood with the smell of rust had already rushed to his throat. He knew he had suffered internal injuries. He needed to circulate his spiritual power to regulate his breathing or take medicine immediately. Otherwise, he wouldn't even be able to lift the cloud silk. But the enemy obviously wouldn't give him such a chance. Ling Yuxing didn't even have the time to stabilize his body before a figure dashed out from the side and fiercely grabbed his chest with the iron hook in his hand. Yadi. He was also the fastest person in the world. Chapter 3779. The speed under the absolute space domain is something that even Yi Adi is ashamed of. But now Ling Yuxing has lost the ability to escape and resist. The huge hook claw grabbed down from the air, like the scythe of the Grim Reaper. The sound of a sharp blade piercing through flesh was heard. However, the expected pain did not come. Ling Yuxing opened his eyes and saw the broad and thick back of his 2nd senior brother Qinjiu, and the hook that pierced his body, as well as the blood dripping from the hook claw. 2nd senior brother? Ling Yuxing's eyes were red. Qinjiu grabbed Yi Adi's hook claw, completely disregarding his own wound, and fiercely pulled, throwing him out. Qinjiu turned his head to Ling Yuxing, revealing a simple and honest smile. Little 5, don't cry. I'm fine. He patted his chest with his blood-stained hand. My skin is rough and thick, really, a little. It doesn't hurt at all. Yi Adi somersaulted in the air and lightly landed on the ground, his face revealing an expression of interest. He also used his tongue to lick the blood on his hook claw. Seeing this scene, he could not help but burst into laughter. His figure flashed, and he once again rushed toward the two. Being hit by my soul-piercing life-reaping hook, and still saying that it doesn't hurt, I respect you for being a man. So this time I will let you die a little faster. As soon as his voice fell, Yi Audi threw out the silver hook in his hand. The hook flew high in the air, and suddenly began to split into countless densely packed ones. There seemed to be a hand in the air controlling these silver hooks. Then one by one, they began to smash toward Qin Jiao and Ling Yusheng like gravel. Qin Jiao quickly erected an earth wall to resist. However, the soul-piercing life-reaping hook is a special kind of heavenly tool. How could a mere earth wall block it? Every day. So after a moment, Qin Jiao's body was already covered with cuts and bruises, and his clothes were all dyed red with blood. But during this process, he firmly protected Ling Yusheng, not letting him suffer the slightest injury. Qin Jiao's spiritual power was also almost consumed. All the earth walls that could be erected were used to protect Ling Yusheng. Without the earth wall, he used his fists and punched at the falling Ingo. Ling Yusheng looked at the blood splattering in front of him and listened to the sound of sharp blades piercing through flesh. His eyes became redder, and tears welled up in his eyes. He was not strong enough. Why couldn't he become stronger? If he could use these silver hooks to stop everything around him, he would be able to do so. Second senior brother wouldn't have to be seriously injured to protect him. Some kind of power was surging wildly in his body. Ling Yusheng's pale face flushed red. Suddenly, he let out a furious roar. All of you, stop. Whoosh! Time seemed to stop at this moment. The noisy and bloody battlefield seemed to have been paused by someone. Even the silver hook that Yi Audi had summoned had stopped in midair. In this still scene, there was only the young man covered in blood. His clothes were fluttering in the wind, and his hair was fluttering gently. His face was pale without a trace of blood. His body was frail and weak, swaying in the wind. He gritted his teeth and used the last bit of strength in his body to throw the cloud silk in his hand. The cloud silk shot out like an arrow, wrapped around the motionless Yi Audi, and tied him up tightly. Then Ling Yusheng could no longer hold on, and fell straight down. Almost at the moment he fell, the seal of time and space was lifted. But the whole battlefield was silent. Chapter 3780. Yi Audi even forgot to struggle. He stared at the unconscious Ling Yusheng on the ground, his eyes full of disbelief. The fourth layer of the absolute space domain. How old is this kid? The cloud silk cloth was a heavenly god tool Mu Yen found in the Tianguang ruins. Could fight, confine, defend, and fly. Yi Adi's cultivation was high and his speed was fast, but he couldn't easily break free from the cloud silk cloth. He simply stopped struggling. Instead, he hopped to Yi Aishan's side in a tied-up position. Boss, I'm sorry I lost. I didn't expect that a kid in his early 20s could master the fourth layer of the absolute space domain. Yi Aishan shook his head and said with a serious expression, not only the absolute space domain, but he has also touched the threshold of the law of time and space. These little guys. His eyes swept over the Xiaoyao school people on the battlefield, then fell on Chu Moli. Only then did he withdraw his complicated gaze. If these little fellows are allowed to survive, their strength will be immeasurable in the future. Yi Adi's face was pale, but he still stubbornly said, no matter how strong their potential is, it's just potential. They will definitely lose today's battle. They will also die. Yi Aishan glanced at his brother, who was wrapped like a cocoon, and said with a faint smile, are you sure? Yi Adi said angrily, these little guys are all seriously injured and exhausted. Even without me, can't Akshuan and Huang deal with them? Yes, on the surface, even without Yi Akshuan and Yi Huang, the remaining 4 people of the Xiaoyao school were already an arrow at the end of its flight, and had no chance of winning. But was that really the case? Seeing Yi Adi concede defeat and leave the battlefield, Yi Huang spat with a wretched expression. Originally, he was playing with Luo Yu and Yun Ruhan. But now, his eyes turned cold, and his figure suddenly turned into a streamer, rushing towards the unconscious Ling Yusheng. Stop! You e-book, don't hurt fifth brother. Yun Ruhan and Luo Yu desperately tried to stop him. But they were still a step too late. Qin Jiao, who was the closest to Ling Yusheng, rushed over and used his body to block Ling Yusheng. Puchi. Sharp and poisonous claws penetrated Qin Jiao's body. Blood dripped onto Ling Yusheng's body. Qin Jiao's face contorted and all the muscles in his body trembled. The poison on Yi Wang's claws was not a lethal poison, but a neurotoxin that could cause unbearable pain. Even though Qin Jiao had a half-human, half-puppet body, she still felt a pain that came from the depths of her soul. Yi Huang pulled out its sharp claws. He opened his mouth and revealed a sinister smile. "You want to block my ghost claw? How about I let the two of you have a heartache together?" As he spoke, his greenish-black claws began to grow larger and longer. Moreover, every sharp fingernail was shining with a strange light. It was obviously poisonous. If this ghost claw pierced through his body, then not only would Qin Jiao not be able to withstand it, even Ling Yusheng, who was under his protection, would undoubtedly die. Qin Jiao's pupils instantly contracted. Looking at the merciless ghost claw, there was only one thought in his mind. He had to block it. He had to block it. Otherwise little Five would be injured. Chapter 3781. He was so stupid and useless, but his fellow apprentices never despised him. If he couldn't even protect his fellow apprentices, what right did he have to stay in the carefree school? Dang! Yi Huang waited for the pleasure of his nails piercing through flesh, but what he got was a sharp pain, as if his nails were about to split open. It was the sound of metal clashing with stone. Yi Huang's eyes widened, and he stared in shock at the idiot he had never taken seriously. His entire body was shining with a dazzling golden light. When his ghostly claws landed on his body, it was as if they had landed on the hardest steel. They couldn't penetrate him at all. How was this possible? His ghostly claws could even easily penetrate top-grade armor. Fourth mutation of Power Domain. Yi Aishan, who was watching from the side, sucked in a breath of cold air. Indestructible body of Vajra. These guys? How many more fright did they want to give him? Yi Aishan, who had just confidently said that they would definitely win even without him, couldn't say anything now. Could it be that the three of them, heaven-breaking cultivators, were really going to lose to five little guys? Just as this frightening thought flashed through Yi Aishan's mind, Qin Jiao slowly opened his eyes. Then he used his golden hand to grab Yi Huang and threw him in the direction of Yun Ruhan, who was rushing over. Qin Jiao showed a happy, childlike smile to Yun Ruhan, eldest senior apprentice brother. "I've protected Xiaowu." Yun Ruhan's nose turned sour. Then he smiled and said loudly, "Second brother, you and Xiaowu both did well. Now go and rest. Leave the rest to us." Qin Jiao was used to being obedient. He carried the unconscious Ling Yusheng on his back and walked to Chu Moli's side without any hesitation. 139 reading net before he could even say a single word to Chu Moli, the golden radiance on his body dissipated, and he collapsed stiffly on the ground. Yi Huang, who had been thrown by Qin Jiao, couldn't turn around beautifully. Instead, he was smashed into a deep pit. When he got up, even his mouth was filled with mud. He was in a sorry state. He spat and looked at Yun Ruhan and Luo Yu standing in front of him. He gritted his teeth and said, "Very well, you've successfully pissed me off. I will cut you into pieces and throw them in front of Big Blockhead. None of you will escape today." Yun Ruhan ignored Yi Huang's clamor. Instead, he stabbed the ice soul sword into the ground in front of him and sat down cross-legged. "Shao Qi, help me block him for a moment." Luo Yu nodded, her hands moving to the sides. Dozens of humanoid puppets appeared. Some of them guarded Yun Ruhan, while others stood in front of Yi Huang. The fiery red Baifeng bird was more than twice as big as it was when it first came out of Wushang Palace. At this moment, it spread its wings and let out a crisp cry. Yi Huang sneered, "You're just a brat who hasn't even grown his hair. Do you think you can stop me?" As soon as his voice fell, he had already soared into the sky. The ghost claw fiercely clawed at the Baifeng. The Baifeng sensed danger. It let out a long cry and soared into the sky, narrowly avoiding the attack. However, Yi Huang's figure flickered as he pounced in Yun Ruhan's direction. Bang! The dozen or so puppets surrounding Yun Ruhan suddenly merged into one just as Yi Huang was about to reach her. In an instant, they formed an enormous puppet that was tens of meters tall and blocked Yi Huang. Alluring Enchantress, heaven-defying baby, black-bellied dad, please add this to your collection. Chapter 3782. Monarch, Puppet. Yi Adi's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. In the past, the Over-the-Wave Palace, which was the best at puppetry, had not been able to raise a few monarch puppets for thousands of years. However, this kid, who looked like he was still wet behind the ears, was able to assemble a dozen commander-level puppets in an instant. Moreover, he was not an ordinary puppeteer. He had a divine beast that was infinitely close to the overlord rank. What kind of amazing summoning talent did he have? The fourth layer of mirror domain. Yi Ashan's expression was somewhat absent-minded and blurry. His eyes stared blankly at Luo Yu, who was controlling the puppet, and his thoughts seemed to have drifted into the distance. After a long time, he murmured, "This is the second person I've seen who has the mirror field and reached the fourth level." Yi Ashan's voice was so soft that Yi Adi couldn't hear him clearly. He was about to ask. The situation on the battlefield changed again. There are 5 elements in heaven and earth: water, fire, metal, wood, and earth. Through time and space, 10,000 things are formed. The fusion of divine energy, all natural laws, is the clouds and rain, is the mountains and seas. The fourth layer of the mountain-sea domain, break. Boom! Yi Huang, who was about to attack Luo Yu, suddenly felt the ground beneath his feet shake violently. Countless cracks appeared under his feet. It was as if a huge whirlpool had formed under the ground and was about to swallow him up. Yi Huang was about to leap into the air. There was a cracking sound in his ears. A wave of extreme coldness came from the air, from the soles of his feet, and spread to his limbs and bones. Then, before he could react, his feet were frozen by a thick layer of ice, unable to move. Yi Huang looked at Yun Ruhan in shock. Broadway, his face was pale as he struggled to stand up, as if he wanted to pull out his sword. However, activating the fourth layer of the domain of the mountains and seas just now had exhausted all of his yuan qi. Now, he only needed a punch from a mortal to knock him down. But Yun Ruhan didn't look worried at all, because he knew that Little Seven would finish the final blow for him. Chirp! The Baifeng bird spread its huge wings and swooped down. The cry pierced through the sky. Yi Huang cursed and struggled to break free from the ice, but it was clearly too late. Yi Xuan also noticed Yi Huang's miserable state. He frowned and turned around to help. However, at this moment, a blazing flame rushed towards him. It didn't hurt him, but it blocked his path. Yi Xuan looked at the woman in front of him with a complicated expression. "You should know that if I wanted to kill you, your head would have long been separated from your body." Lung Yumo retracted her long blade and casually wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth. She revealed a bright smile. "I know. But it's a pity that if it's just an if, you've already lost your best opportunity." Ha dash! Yi Xuan couldn't help but laugh in anger. He was also a saber user, and the ghost-slicing saber in his hand was a rare supreme-grade heavenly god artifact on the floating island. Just now, in the battle with this little girl, Yi Xuan only felt indescribably satisfied. It had been a long, long time since he had felt this feeling of meeting his match and being unstoppable. As a result, he was reluctant to injure Leng Yuma. But this didn't mean that a little girl could talk nonsense in front of him, Yi Xuan. Yi Xuan sneered and put the knife back into the scabbard. Chapter 3783. Little girl, I'll show you right now what it means to say that there's always someone better out there. I hope you'll understand next time that in front of absolute power, talent and potential are just bullshit. As he spoke, Yi Xuan pulled out his ghost cutter. The blade was bigger than before, emitting a ghostly aura. The expressions of the onlookers outside the barrier changed drastically as they retreated. Leng Yuma's face was pale. She had used up most of her spiritual power. In front of the tall and sturdy Yi Xuan, she looked like she could be sent flying with a single slap. But her eyes shone brighter than ever. Red flames rose from her body, slowly blooming into a dazzling red lotus in the air. The red lotus trembled slightly, and countless sparks fell. They landed on the red lotus soul-stealing blade, then disappeared without a trace. The red lotus soul-stealing blade let out a buzzing sound. Complicated patterns began to appear on the blade. The long blade lightly slashed, and a fiery lotus began to bloom on the ground. Seeing this scene, Yi Ashuan's expression changed slightly, the fourth level of the flame domain. These 5 little fellows really exceeded his expectations too much. He thought he could easily win the battle. He didn't expect it to be a bitter battle between him and Yi Awang. Yi Awang's movement and spiritual power were both limited, so he obviously couldn't hold on for long. The most unbelievable thing was, these 5 people all had a breakthrough in their domains during the battle. And each of them had a level 4 domain. They could no longer be called geniuses. They were truly monstrous geniuses that only appeared once in 10,000 years. Although he was shocked, Yi Ashuan quickly calmed down. He didn't give Ling Yuma any time to gather power. He gripped the ghost cutter tightly and quickly stepped forward. It was just a level 4 flame domain. He didn't care about it. Clang dash! The red lotus soul-stealing blade and the ghost cutter collided, causing an earth-shattering sound. Yi Ashuan took a few steps back and quickly used his spiritual power to extinguish the flames on the ghost cutter blade. He looked at Ling Yuma and the blade in her hand in shock. This isn't a heavenly deity weapon. What level is it? Ling Yuma's eyes were red from the flames. She raised the long blade in her hand and slashed down again. Deathless flame technique. Bang! They clashed again, and the ghost cutter let out a buzzing sound as if it couldn't take it anymore. The sparks that landed on the blade curled up and devoured the ghostly aura on the blade. Yi Ashuan hurriedly mobilized his spiritual energy to extinguish the fire. However, Ling Yuma's third slash had already landed. Deathless flame formula. Bang bang bang. Yi Ashuan was about to go crazy. No, it was this woman. Was she crazy? Ming Ming's face was pale, blood was flowing out of the corner of his mouth, and the hand holding the saber was trembling. But she didn't have the slightest intention of retreating or adjusting. He only knew how to attack, and attack. Before this, Yi Ashuan had never thought that in the face of an earth-opening realm little girl he could only defend in a flurry, without even the slightest room to resist. However, this kind of attack was basically killing 800 enemies, but injuring 8,000 of their own. Yi Ashuan's face was ashen as he thought, there's no need for me to fall, she can't hold on at all. He wanted to see how many more slashes this woman could make. The year had just flashed across his mind. Chirp! A clear and melodious chirp came from the sky. Yi Ashuan's face changed. Chapter 3784. Damn it! He had actually forgotten about the existence of that puppet boy. At this moment, an unimaginable thought finally arose in his mind. Were they going to lose this battle? 3 heaven-breaking stage cultivators actually lost to 5 earth-opening stage cultivators. Yi Ahuang and Yi Axian supported each other as they staggered towards Yi Atian. Their heads almost drooped into the ground. Boss, sorry we were careless. Yi Axian's gaze was still on the opposite side. At this moment, the entire square of Liberty City had become a sea of joy. Everyone was laughing, jumping, and making merry. They were all prepared to live and die together with Liberty City. Unexpectedly, Yun Ruhan's group actually won. They won in such an incredible, bizarre, and soul-stirring manner. Liberty, 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 who else but me can do it? Liberty, liberty, dominating the world. No one knew who took the lead, but the whole city started shouting loudly. Yi Axian's eyes revealed a somewhat complicated look, and he murmured in a low voice. Such talent, such reputation, only the royal preceptor and can compare to him, right? Boss? Yi Awang's voice called Yi Axian back to his thoughts. He lowered his eyes and said calmly, as long as it's a battle, there will be winners and losers. The gap in cultivation level is not a 100% guarantee of victory. I hope that after today, you will be able to clearly understand this point. The 3 answered, then lowered their heads and sat where they were, and began to take out medicinal pills to heal their injuries. Looking at the 5 people of the Liberty sect who were also healing, their emotions couldn't help but surge violently. They lost. They actually lost to a few little fellows. This was simply a great humiliation for them. But they had to admit the talent of these 5 people. If they didn't die prematurely here, their future would be limitless. They could leave the floating island alive. Just as they were thinking, they suddenly saw the weak cripple slowly walking toward them, surrounded by the 6 people on the opposite side. The 5 people had obviously taken medicinal pills to heal their injuries. But their injuries were too serious, so their faces were pale. They seemed to be more seriously injured than Yi Wang and the other 2 people. But so what if they were seriously injured? They were the final victors. Chu Moli smiled and said, "The gambling battle has already ended. I wonder if everyone here is willing to honor the agreement?" Yi Shen's gaze swept across the 7 of them, pausing slightly on Luo Yu's face. Then he sighed softly and said, "The Imperial Preceptor's orders cannot be decided by a single duel." Luo Yu said angrily, "So you want to go back on your word?" Yi Shen curled his lips and said unhurriedly, "If you win the duel, I can promise to let Liberty City and everyone in the city go. However, the First Prince and General Wei are the people that the Imperial Preceptor wants. We must take them away. Of course, there are also the things that the Imperial Preceptor wants." Chu Moli raised his eyebrows. "Things? We have something that the Imperial Preceptor wants?" Yi Shen nodded and said, "A Vichy pagoda." Chu Moli's eyes flickered and he lowered his eyelids slightly. Ling Yusheng frowned and said, "What a Vichy pagoda? There is no such thing in Liberty City at all." Yi Shen glanced at Chu Moli with a faint smile. "Maybe you don't have it, but Yi Liangchen, the current master of the Heavenly Light Ruins and the helper of the #1 gang in the world, definitely has it. Don't tell me that nobody in Liberty City knows who Yi Liangchen is." Chapter 3785. Ling Yusheng and the others looked at each other. Wasn't Yi Liangchen our junior sister? Our junior sister had the Avicii Pagoda? What the hell was that? Suddenly, they all had a flash of inspiration. They all thought of the jade-white pagoda that Chi-Wen had mentioned. It could even absorb the power of resentment in the yin-yang twin hearts. How could such a pagoda be an ordinary treasure? Before that, they had seen the 6 Stars Pagoda and the Chaotic Pagoda, but they had never seen such a pagoda. Now that they thought about it, it should be the Avicii Pagoda that Yi Qingfeng wanted. Yi Shen's gaze swept over their expressions. His smile deepened. "It seems that you know the whereabouts of Yi Liangchen and the Avicii Pagoda. In that case, things will be easy. Seeing that you have won the wagered battle and have a bright future ahead of you, I can take a step back. We will only take Wei Mian and the Avicii Pagoda. Since your highness has changed your name and body, we will consider that you have nothing to do with the Lan Empire. In this way, everything will be written off. Is that okay?" Luo Yu said coldly, "What do you want to do with Uncle Wei?" Yi Shen laughed in a low voice as if he was laughing at Luo Yu. "How should we deal with the divine general of the Imperial region who wants to go against the Imperial Master? If we allow him to live in this world, it will make the Imperial Master more threatening. He was obviously going to kill Wei Mian. Or if General Wei commits suicide now, I will only take the Avicii Pagoda." Luo Yu was furious. But before she could speak, she was stopped by Yun Ruhan. "It seems that there is no room for negotiation." He looked at Yi Shen and the others coldly. "If you want to fight, then fight. No need to talk nonsense." However, Yi Shen didn't move. Instead, he slowly shook his head with a pitiful expression on his face. "I've already given all of you a chance to live. Why do all of you insist on going about things the wrong way?" He looked at the angry eyes of Luo Yu and the others. He sneered, "You don't have to look at me with such vigilance. We have agreed before that I will not take action. Since Di and the others lost, they will not take action." Yun Ruhan was stunned. "Since you are not taking action, then what?" Suddenly, his voice paused. His already pale face lost all color in an instant. He abruptly raised his head to look at the sky. In the northern sky, a giant blue beast that seemed to have merged with the sky was flying toward them at lightning speed. That was the exclusive summoned beast of the Lan family empire's imperial advisor Yi Chengfeng, Water Qilin. It was also the divine beast closest to dominator rank in this world. The people of the Xiaoyao sect suddenly tensed up. Even Chu Moli frowned slightly. His fingers curled up slightly as he tapped on the armrest of his wheelchair. In just a moment, the Water Qilin was already floating in midair. A tall, thin, and weak figure jumped down from the Water Qilin and looked down at Liberty City. His gaze swept over the citizens of Liberty City, but it was as if he was looking at countless ants that he did not need to care about. Finally, his gaze fell on Yun Ruhen and he warmly said, "Your First Highness, we meet again." Yun Ruhen pursed her lips and gripped the ice soul sword in her hand, ready for battle. Yi Chengfeng chuckled, then raised his hand. Luo Yu heard a cry of surprise from behind and beside her. Then, Wei Mian and Yun Ruhen flew up involuntarily and landed beside Yi Chengfeng. Chapter 3786. Each of them was wearing a blue water ring. Wei Mian's fighting capacity was not strong. Even if he exhausted all his spiritual power, he couldn't break free. Yun Ruhen, who had just fought a great battle, was now an arrow at the end of its flight and had no power to resist. Eldest senior brother. General Wei. Seeing this scene, the people below screamed and wanted to rush up. But Yi Chengfeng just patted the water Qilin lightly. The water Qilin opened its mouth and suddenly spat out a water ball. In an instant, it was like a gust of wind and huge waves. The whole carefree city was submerged under the huge waves. Yi Chengfeng sneered and said, "I advise you not to act rashly. Otherwise, I can destroy this city and kill these two people right now. If you don't believe me, you can try." Luo Yu and the others, who originally wanted to rush up, had to stop. Anxiously and fiercely staring at Yi Chengfeng, she said, "Give back eldest senior brother and Uncle Wei." Yi Chengfeng's eyes fell on Luo Yu's face, and he was slightly stunned. Then his eyes suddenly drooped down, and the corners of his mouth raised into a cold arc. "Tian." Yi Aishan and the other three hurriedly flew forward. "Greetings, National Preceptor." Yi Chengfeng lightly glanced at the four people. "You lost the bet?" This sentence was said indifferently, without a trace of anger. But Yi Aishan and the other two lowered their heads in shame and fear. "We are useless. Please punish us, National Preceptor." Yi Aishan respectfully handed over a mirage stone. Yi Chengfeng didn't pay attention to Yi Aishan and the other two, but casually injected his divine sense into the mirage stone. Soon, the scene of the battle just now appeared in front of him. Even with Yi Chengfeng's calmness, after roughly understanding the process of the battle just now, he couldn't help but show a surprised expression. Temple Street, his eyes fell on the people of the carefree sect below, and the corners of his mouth slowly raised into an interesting arc. 1 country, 3 alliances, 6 families, and 8 sects on the floating island, each of them thought highly of themselves. They vainly tried to include all the resources on the island in order to cultivate elites for their own families and sections. And all these young elites were also arrogant, and didn't put the disciples of other small sects or rogue cultivators in their eyes. Not to mention the inferior cultivators, who had ascended from the Xiuxian continent. However, in this Liberty City, there were actually a total of 5 little monsters with extraordinary talent. He had already reached the Earth creation realm at such a young age. He was merely at the Earth creation tier, yet he was able to fight against a heaven-breaking tier elite. Especially the youngest puppeteer. Seeing Luo Yu combine dozens of puppets into a monarch-level puppet in an instant, Yi Chengfeng suddenly tightened his grip on the mirage stone. His expression became absent-minded and blurry, as if he was looking at the distant past. That kind of extraordinary talent. It was a confident and disdainful smile, yet it was also pure and without any impurities. How many years had it been since he last saw it? Yi Chengfeng suddenly felt an irrepressible anger and ruthlessness in his heart. The water Qilin at the side seemed to have sensed its master's emotions. Suddenly, it let out an angry roar and raised its front hooves high. Then, he suddenly breathed out a mouthful of white gas toward Liberty City below. Yi Aishan's expression changed greatly and he couldn't help but cry out, "State Preceptor!" Before he could finish his sentence, the white gas had already sunk into Liberty City, and then it suddenly grew larger. Then, the cultivators in the city screamed in horror. Ugh! It's so cold. What's this? The correct chapter of Alluring Enchantress, Heaven-Defying Baby's Black-Bellied Father, will continue to be updated on the mobile game bar. There are no advertisements on the website. Please collect and recommend the mobile game bar. If you like Alluring Enchantress, Heaven-Defying Baby's Black-Bellied Father, please collect and recommend it. Chapter 3787. My feet are frozen. I can't move. Help me. The water ball that the water Kylan had spat out just now had made the entire Liberty City surge with waves, and it was almost submerged. At this moment, the temperature of the water that hadn't completely faded started to drop sharply, turning into a thick layer of ice. Some cultivators wanted to fly up and escape, but they found that their bodies were eroded by the white mist. Even their blood seemed to be frozen. All their movements and the circulation of their spiritual energy became extremely slow. When they realized what was going on, they had lost all ability to resist and turned into ice sculptures. Yi Ching-feng, are you crazy? What on earth do you want to do? In the sky, Yun Ruhen watched the Liberty City that her junior sister and her junior brothers had built turn into a silent city of ice. The anger in his eyes was about to burst out. That was hundreds of thousands of lives. This man didn't even blink his eyes, and he could turn those fresh lives into cold corpses. Just like a dozen years ago, he wore a faint smile as he looked down at the Blue Emperor City, which had turned into a river of blood. Yi Ching-feng turned to him with a mocking look. Your Highness, didn't you know what I want to do from the very beginning? He paused for a moment and then said word by word, I want all the creatures on this floating island to die and their souls vanish, never to be reincarnated. Yun Ruhen looked into his bright and dazzling eyes, and an inexplicable chill ran down her spine. She couldn't help but shiver. For a moment, she even forgot to be angry. Especially the descendants of Lan Haotsong. As soon as he finished his words, Yun Ruhen felt vigilant and a sense of crisis arose spontaneously. At the same time, Wei Mian, who was also bound by the blue water ring, changed his expression. He couldn't help but exclaim, Your Highness, watch out. Yun Ruhen felt that her neck was suddenly gripped by a hand that was as cold as ice. Literature. Following that, his entire body was violently thrown downwards. Bang! A huge pit appeared on the ground, which was full of bumps and hollows. Yun Ruhen was deeply stuck in the center of the pit. Blood was flowing in the cracks of the stones, and she couldn't get up again. Eldest senior brother? Luo Yu and the rest screamed and rushed over. But before they could reach Yun Ruhen, a ferocious beast roared and swooped down from the sky. A huge airwave accompanied by a bone-chilling cold swept towards them. Even with Luo Yu and the others' current cultivation, they could not stand steadily under the strong wind and were flipped over a few times. Yi Ching-feng's figure had unknowingly descended from the sky to the side of the huge pit. His eyes were cold and indifferent as he looked at Yun Ruhen, who was lying in a pool of blood. He slowly raised his pale, slender hand. As the energy surged, the water vapor in the air began to condense into ice crystals. In just a short moment, countless sharp icicles densely covered the top of the giant pit. The water Kylan let out an angry roar, and the icicles in the sky all turned into arrows, flying toward the unconscious Yun Ruhen. Eldest senior brother? Stop! Don't hurt eldest senior brother. Looking at the dense cluster of icicles stabbing toward Yun Ruhen's eyes widened. Luo Yu's face was deathly pale, and her pupils suddenly became blood red. Her already dried-up dantian had unknowingly formed a storm of spiritual energy. Chapter 3788. A white soul bead slowly emerged from his back, shining with dazzling light. I told you to stop. Did you hear me? A stern shout. A huge white beast shadow soared into the sky. The raging wind and the whistling icicles were like mirages created by the morning fog the moment the giant beast appeared. Under the illumination of the sun, They all disappeared without a trace. Roar! The white figure opened its mouth and let out a roar that was neither light nor heavy. The red horn on its forehead was brighter and more dazzling than blood. The water unicorn, which had been arrogant and looked down on humans like dirt, suddenly froze. Its bell-like big eyes stared at the beast shadow that was countless times bigger than it. Buzz, buzz, buzz. A slight buzzing sound rang in everyone's ears. At this moment, the entire floating sky island seemed to be shaking and stirring, welcoming the return of their ancestor, the beast god. The shaking stopped after a while. However, the entire Liberty City was caught in a dead silence. They even held their breath, or they didn't dare to move or breathe. They were afraid that if they made a big noise, the dreamlike scene in front of them would be shattered. Even Yi Qingfeng, Yi Aishan, and the others were dumbfounded. They just stood there blankly, as if they had forgotten what day it was. God, what did I see? Yi Aishan murmured in a low voice in disbelief. Bai Zhe? How could it be the real body of the divine beast Bai Zhe? Didn't it already? He didn't finish his words. The four of them retracted their gazes from Bai Zhe and looked at Yi Qingfeng. Yi Aishan's voice became extremely hoarse and difficult at this moment. National Master, you. When he said these three words and saw Yi Qingfeng's eyes, his throat suddenly choked, and he couldn't make a sound anymore. Wheel literature Nadi's hands hanging by his sides unconsciously clenched tightly. In this dead silence, as if time and space had come to a standstill. Only the young man under the huge beast shadow seemed to have no idea what kind of sensation he had caused. Or, at this moment, he didn't care about the consequences of summoning the divine beast Bai Zhe. Luo Yu staggered to Yun Ruhan's side and helped her up. His tentacles were clammy and sticky. Before he could say anything, Luo Yu's tears were already flowing uncontrollably. Eldest senior brother, you'll be fine, you'll be fine. With a trembling hand, he stuffed a pill into Yun Ruhan's mouth while carefully wiping away the blood on his face. Very quickly, Ling Yuma and the rest rushed to Yun Ruhan's side. Some people stuck talismans on his body, while others took out a spirit-gathering disc, hoping to help Yun Ruhan absorb the medicinal effects better. Everyone knew that in the previous battle, everyone from the Xiaoyao sect had used up almost all of their strength. Although the elixir that Mu Yen left behind could heal and recover. However, it took time for the pill to be absorbed. Before this, they were already exhausted from sealing the power of resentment in the yin-yang twin hearts. He had to rely on pills to force himself to go into battle. Taking too many pills in a short period of time would only greatly reduce the efficacy of the pills. As for Yun Ruhan, it would only be worse than everyone else. Because before he had to endure the heavenly lightning, he had relied on Mu Yan's treatment and pills to wake up. His body was already at the end of its tether. Now, he was seriously injured by Yi Qingfeng. Even if he had a half-demon and half-spirit body, he might not be able to make it. Chapter 3789. Yun Ruhan slowly opened her eyes and saw the worried faces of the people of the Xiaoyao sect and Luo Yu's red eyes. She smiled weakly and said, I'm such a useless senior brother. I make you worry. His line of sight turned and landed on the divine beast Bai Zhe, who was looking down from above. His pupils unconsciously shrank. Then he couldn't help but smile helplessly. His gaze was fixed on Luo Yu. There was an indescribable pride and pity in his eyes. Fourth stage, mirror life domain, monarch level, puppet master, and the master of the divine beast Bai Zhe. This was his Shao Qi. There were always some people in this world whose brilliance could not be concealed no matter how hard they tried. But at the same time, Yun Ruhan was also very clear. Luo Yu summoned the divine beast Bai Zhe. This meant that his identity could no longer be concealed. Chu Moli pinched Yun Ruhan's hand and examined it for a moment before saying indifferently, it's just some internal injuries. Once junior sister comes out, she'll be able to heal them. It had to be said that the bodies of the devil race were really too tough. If a normal spirit cultivator were to be smashed down from a high place after exhausting their spiritual energy, all their bones would have been broken and they would have died. On the other hand, Yun Ruhan was only slightly shaken. Furthermore, as the monster core slowly revolved, her injuries healed on their own. Great. After confirming that Yun Ruhan was fine, Luo Yu relaxed. The breath she had been holding in disappeared in an instant. In the sky, Bai Zai's figure swayed and slowly gathered into the soul pearl, disappearing without a trace. His body went limp, unable to support himself any longer, and directly fell onto Qinjiu. 100%, Bai Zai's disappearance caused the pressure in the air to dissipate as well. The inside and outside of Liberty City, which had been quiet previously, were like the surface of a tranquil lake that had been tossed with a boulder. Am I seeing things? I actually saw someone summon the divine beast Bai Zai? Furthermore, it wasn't a shadow, but a real divine beast, Bai Zai. I'm dreaming. Yes, I must be dreaming. Wasn't it said that when the floating ancestor, Lan Xiaozi, created the floating island, he sacrificed himself and the divine beast Bai Zai? No, do you still remember? 17 years ago, there was a rumor. It said that he's the newly conferred Little Highness of the Lan family empire. He's able to summon the divine beast Bai Zai, and is reputed to be the reincarnation of the ancestor. Didn't they say that it was the Empress's Shao family who cheated? Apart from treason and rebellion, the Shao clan was also punished for blaspheming the levitating ancestor. But what if it's not a rumor? Doesn't it mean that the seventh young master of Liberty City is the Little Highness who was said to be the reincarnation of the first ancestor? The other cultivators of Liberty City were still discussing their speculations and suspicions. Butcher and the others reacted immediately. Why did their general care so much for the seventh young master from the very beginning? So much so that it was even more than his loyalty to the young Mississippi. So it was actually the crown prince that the Wei family army had once sworn loyalty to. Butcher and the rest's eyes reddened at once, their hearts surging with indescribable emotions. More than 10 years ago, 30,000 soldiers of the Wei family refused to betray the Empress and His Highness the Crown Prince and were massacred. They, who were once high and mighty generals and lieutenants, were all crippled of their cultivation and thrown into the shattered stone hill. Chapter 3790. Who knew that not only would they be reborn, they would be able to see the young prince they were loyal to again. After 16 years, their young prince was no longer the child that could be trampled on by others. He was a genius that could fight against heaven-breaking state cultivators alone and summon the divine beast Bai Zai. Greetings, Your Highness. No one knew who started it. Butcher, elder brother, Tai Tu Ruanyang. They all knelt towards Luo Yu. The light in their eyes was even brighter than when they knew they could leave the rocky hill. It was as if they had finally found their faith. They knew that their years of waiting and perseverance were not in vain. As Butcher and the others knelt, inspired by Wei Mian, the 100,000 Xiaoyao soldiers outside the city also knelt down and shouted loudly. Greetings, Your Highness. At this moment, their voices were like a great bell. Even the earth seemed to tremble slightly. Luo Yu looked at the people kneeling in front of him and listened to the tsunami of shouts around him. His mouth couldn't help but twitch. What the hell? Although he already knew about his past, he had no interest in being a prince and acting out a prince's revenge. He only wanted to be the happy Shao Qi of the Xiaoyao sect. That was enough. Luo Yu coughed lightly and was about to speak. Suddenly, Butcher's expression changed and he shouted, Protect His Highness. Leng Yuma, who had been vigilantly observing Yi Qingfeng's every move, instantly unsheathed her long sword and slashed towards the void. A red flame lotus bloomed. It transformed into a ferocious beast in the void, as if it was going to devour that thin and frail figure. However, Yi Qingfeng only waved his hand lightly, and the huge flame beast was frozen in midair. Shao Qi, eldest senior brother. 2 blue rings of water shackled the exhausted Luo Yu and Yun Ruhan and flew towards Yi Qingfeng. Ling Yusheng suddenly soared into the sky and turned into lightning, grabbing Luo Yu's hand. Leng Yuma and the others rushed up. Chu Moli, who was in a wheelchair below, slowly knocked his bow. However, at this moment, a heavy object smashed towards Ling Yusheng. He was just about to dodge, but when he saw what was coming at him, his expression changed. He subconsciously reached out to catch it. That was Wei Mian. Yi Aishan, who had originally come to capture Wei Mian, had unexpectedly thrown Wei Mian over, using him as a shield to block Ling Yuxing, or rather, to block Chu Moli's cursed arrow. With this delay, the water Qilin Yi Chengfeng as well as Yi Aishan had already fled far away, disappearing into the horizon. In the distance, Yi Chengfeng's emotionless voice could be heard. Tell Yi Liangchen, if he wants these two's lives, he has to exchange them with the Avatar. General, are you all right? Butcher and the others quickly helped Wei Mian up. I'm sorry, General. We were too useless. We couldn't protect the Crown Prince. The rims of Butcher's eyes were red, but there was some despair on his face. We were too naive. We thought that with the help of the 100,000 free unfettered army, we thought that we could fight against Yi Chengfeng. How could they have imagined that Yi Chengfeng would actually become stronger and stronger in just a short dozen years? Yi Chengfeng hates the people of the Lan royal family so much. I wonder if His Highness and His Highness will be tortured by this bastard. Tu and the others' voices rang in Wei Mian's ears, but he just stood there in a daze, unable to recover. Chapter 3791. Because of Luo Yu's divine beast base. And because of Yi Chengfeng's attitude. Wei Mian knew that the Crown Prince could summon the divine beast base. But he didn't know until today. The base that Luo Yu summoned was a real one. It wasn't a beast soul formed by the energy of the soul bead. Instead, it was like Lan Xiaozi, the founder of the Floating Sky sect, who kept the real divine beast base in his soul bead and signed a contract with it. But how was that possible? The divine beast base had been sacrificed to the Floating Sky Island. And Yi Chengfeng. Few people in the world knew better than Wei Mian how sinister and cruel this man was. He could order his men to slaughter 30,000 elite soldiers while he was talking and laughing, and he wouldn't even raise an eyebrow. When he washed the Blue Emperor city with blood, this man chopped off the heads of the Shao family without hesitation when he saw the old, weak, women, and children kneeling at his feet, crying and begging. Such a man only took away the first and second highnesses. He didn't turn the entire Liberty City into a river of blood, leaving no one alive. He even let go of Wei Mian, who used to be a thorn in his side. It could be said that he had been chased by the people of the Shao Yao sect. It was really not like Yi Chengfeng's usual style at all. General, are you all right? Hearing Rui's mother's worried call, Wei Mian came back to his senses. He met everyone's concerned eyes. Wei Mian smiled bitterly. I'm sorry. I'm useless. That's why your highness got into trouble? No, it has nothing to do with you. I'm the useless one. Ling Yuxing punched the city wall hard and interrupted Wei Mian. It was he who didn't notice Yi Chengfeng's plot and led them to Liberty City. It was he who let go and let Yi Chengfeng take eldest senior brother and seventh senior brother away. If anything happened to eldest senior brother and seventh senior brother, he would never forgive himself. Fifth senior brother, it has nothing to do with you. Lun Yuma put her hand on his shoulder and said softly, plus, didn't Yi Chengfeng say something before he left? He wants the Avicii Tower in youngest junior sister's hands. Since he wants it, he won't kill seventh senior brother and seventh senior brother. When youngest junior sister comes out of seclusion, give him the Avicii Tower. You can't. Before Lun Yuma could finish her sentence, a cry of surprise came from the horizon. The Avicii Pagoda cannot fall into Yi Chengfeng's hands. Luo Yu realized that she was walking in a spacious and empty palace. He couldn't remember why he was here or what he was doing here. He ran desperately in the palace, but he couldn't even see a shadow of a person. Shao Qi. Suddenly, a sweet voice rang in his ears. Shao Qi, come to mother. Luo Yu subconsciously turned her head, but what she saw was a suffocating sea of corpses and blood. A pungent fishy smell assaulted his nostrils. Suddenly, a hand gripped his ankle, cold and clammy. Luo Yu looked down and realized that her body had turned into that of a child. The person who had grabbed his ankle was soaked in blood, and his face could no longer be seen clearly. Only that pair of eyes were filled with bone-deep hatred, shouting at him over and over again, Your Highness, you must take revenge for my Shao family, for your mother. The child's ankle was so slender and tender. The blood-stained nails were like the fangs of a ferocious beast, digging deep into his flesh. Chapter 3792. It was so painful that he couldn't help but scream. Just as the scream escaped from his throat, it disappeared into the boundless darkness. Luo Yu felt as if her body was continuously falling. He seemed to hear a low and distant voice in his ears again. Thousands of heaven's beasts return, the mountains and rivers appear. I am willing to use my insignificant body as a sacrifice. My soul will fall into the river of forgetfulness, and I will have no regrets in this life. Just to give my son a stairway to heaven. Father! From now on I have no father. In this world, you are the only one who matters to me. I will take you to the floating island. Chu Shi's life will be with you. The beast's soul has been destroyed, and his blood has run dry. We can never meet again. From now on, my soul will fall into the river of forgetfulness, and my heart will be torn and my intestines broken. I only wish to be possessed by a devil, and be doomed eternally. I swear, I will remember everyone here today. One day, I will make you pay with blood, and pay back what you owe me today 10-fold, 100-fold. Luo Yu suddenly jumped up from the bed, his body shivering uncontrollably. He seemed to have had a nightmare again. And it wasn't the first time he had seen these two scenes. A palace filled with mountains of corpses and seas of blood, and he was walking in it when he was young. This should be related to his forgotten memories. And then he heard a series of chaotic voices. He had heard them in the primordial cave abode. But what did those words mean? Especially the voice that said, "One day, I will make you pay with your blood." Even if he couldn't see the face clearly, he could feel the monstrous hatred and ruthlessness from the voice. Who was it that said that? And what did it have to do with him? Why did he dream of it twice in a row? That wasn't right. What time was it now? Why did he care if it was a dream or not? Wasn't he and eldest senior brother captured by that perverted state preceptor called Yi Qingfeng? So now he was in the Lan Empire's palace? Luo Yu leapt up from the bed and looked around. This was a very ordinary room. The decorations were elegant and luxurious. There was incense burning in the corner of the room. The smoke rose into the sky, and then drifted around him. The faint fragrance of sandalwood lingered at the tip of one's nose, causing one to feel drowsy, as if one could immerse oneself in a dream forever. Luo Yu wrinkled her nose and revealed a look of disdain. It turns out to be the tranquilizing incense that can make people sleep for 3 days and 3 nights without waking up. Fortunately, I have already taken the anti-poison pill refined by Sixth Sister, so I am resistant to most poisons and drugs. Therefore, he only woke up after 1 night, even though he was supposed to sleep for 3 days. Luo Yu quietly walked out of the room and flipped onto the roof. It was early in the morning, and the sky had just begun to brighten. Everything was silent. The Lan clan empire was truly worthy of having tens of millions of years of heritage. Luo Yu looked as far as her eyes could see, and what entered her eyes were layers upon layers of verdant mountains, jade palaces, and gold and jade residences. However, amidst this glory, there was a nauseating smell of decay. It was like a beautiful shell. Maggots had already started to grow inside. Luo Yu only glanced at it casually and did not care about whether the palace was ruined or not. He was only concerned about one thing, and that was where did Yi Qingfeng bring his eldest senior brother to? That bastard wouldn't hurt his eldest senior brother, would he? The Lan clan empire was not big, but it was not small either. It was harder than ascending to the heavens to find someone here. And he did not have much time. Chapter 3793. If Yi Qingfeng found out that he had woken up without the requiem incense, he and his eldest senior brother wouldn't be able to escape. So he had to act fast. Luo Yu took a deep breath. Her figure flashed and disappeared from the spot. He didn't notice that after he left. 2 figures slowly appeared where he had been standing. Boss. Yi Adi looked at Yi Aishan, who was standing beside him, eager to try. This kid thinks too highly of us. He dares to wander around in the imperial palace. I'll go catch him now. Humph, I'll let this little bastard know that he can't be arrogant anywhere. Yi glanced at him, then slowly shook his head. No need. As long as he's in the Imperial Palace, he can do whatever he wants. Yi was startled. How can I do that? This kid is very likely to be the little prince of the Lan family empire. Yi stood in a daze for a while, then said softly, "This is Imperial Advisor's order. Do you want to disobey it?" Yi expression changed slightly. He hurriedly said, "I wouldn't dare." But what kind of person was Imperial Advisor? He had followed him for so many years, and had never seen him show mercy to anyone. But why was he so lenient to this kid? Yi wanted to say something but stopped. Imperial Advisor wouldn't really think that kid is. Before he could finish speaking, Yi cold gaze swept over him. "Asian, remember, as a beast slave, you should know what we should say and what we shouldn't say. What's more?" He paused, then his voice became low and distant. "No matter what Imperial Advisor plans or wants to do, we only need to know that what he wants to do is what we want to do. That's enough." Yi was stunned for a long time, then said softly, "Boss, I understand." He slightly gritted his teeth and looked into the distance. That was the majestic Imperial Palace of the Lan family empire, the entire prosperous Lan Emperor city, the floating island that had existed for tens of thousands of years. Yi eyes emitted a complicated light. He suddenly said hoarsely, "Boss, we and Imperial Advisor are finally going to get what we want, right?" Yi closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the corners of his lips were already curling upwards. "We've waited for so long." It had been so long that they had given up everything at all costs. So long that they almost despaired. However, they still had to wait for this day. Luo Yu circled the palace from dawn to dusk. She didn't see a single living person, much less Yun Ruhan. The entire Lan clan empire's imperial palace was simply like a ghost city. Isn't it said that people with amnesia will have flashbacks when they return to familiar places? Luo Yu cursed in her heart as she carefully walked through the empty palace. "I've been walking here for half a day, but I don't feel any sense of familiarity. And what the hell is this palace? Even Yen Luodian wouldn't be so lifeless, right? Could it be that not everyone in the palace is a ghost?" Thinking of this, Luo Yu could not help but shudder. All the hairs on his body stood on end. "Why don't we go back first today?" Luo Yu rubbed the goosebumps on her arms as she muttered, "Eldest senior brother is blessed by the heavens. He'll definitely be fine. But if I'm discovered, I might implicate him." Chapter 3794. Thinking that there might be something dirty around, he felt his hair stand on end. He couldn't stay for another minute. But just as Luo Yu was about to go back, a candle lit up in a room not far away. After all, the entire Lan Empire's palace was cold and silent. There was no one there. After the darkness fell, the entire palace seemed to be shrouded in an isolated space. There was no light, no life. It was like a cemetery. So the candle in front of him was especially abrupt. Luo Yu frowned. In the end, he suppressed the fear in his heart and quietly approached the candlelight. Seeing the figure in the room, Luo Yu almost screamed. Eldest senior brother. So the eldest senior brother he couldn't find after searching for most of the palace was actually here. Luo Yu's heart was pounding. He almost wanted to rush into the room without a care. But luckily his rationality suppressed his impulse. It was obvious that Yun Ruhan wasn't alone in the room. Opposite him sat a man dressed in purple. The candle in the room wasn't very bright, and the man was half hidden in the shadows, so his face was indistinct. But the moment Luo Yu saw the man, his heart shook. An inexplicable feeling welled up in his heart. Plus, he felt that the face was very familiar. Just then he heard his eldest senior brother's voice. It was different from his usual calm and gentle self in the Xiaoyao sect. Yun Ruhan's face was expressionless, and his voice was as cold as ice. "Father, is that all you want to say?" "Father?" Luo Yu's eyes widened slightly. Eldest senior brother called him father. Dream Chinese, so he was the current emperor of the Lan Empire, Lan Yaozong. And his biological father. The man sighed softly from inside the room. I'm very sorry for you and little Seven. Do you think that everything Shao-Chi has experienced over the years and Master's death can be erased with just an apology? Luo Yu stared blankly at Yun Ruhan in the room. He rarely saw his eldest senior brother show such hatred and disgust. Even when facing Yi Chengfeng, he hadn't been so resentful. Luo Yu couldn't help but smile. The bewilderment and shock that had just surged in her heart after knowing the man's identity disappeared without a trace at this moment. All that was left was warmth and reassurance. Yun Ruhan's expression grew colder and colder. Suddenly his wrist moved, and the Ice Soul Sword was unsheathed, stabbing towards Lan Yao sect. Luo Yu was shocked to see this scene from outside. Even though he hated the Blue Glory sect. However, this person was still the biological father of him and eldest senior brother. Killing one's own father with one's own hands was an act that went against human ethics, and would be punished by the heavenly Tao. Because of this, eldest senior brother might have a heart demon on his back and would never be able to break through and ascend again. How could this be? Without thinking, Luo Yu flew in to stop him. However, there was one person who moved faster than him. A tinkling sound was heard. The Ice Soul Sword was deflected a few inches. A familiar voice rang out in the room, "Your Highness, although I would like to see you father and son kill each other, I have other uses for this person. I can only ask that you show mercy." It was Yi Chengfeng. Luo Yu's entire body tensed up and fine beads of sweat formed on his forehead. Under the dim candlelight. Chapter 3795. Yi Chengfeng's appearance actually leaned towards the gentle and delicate side of elegance. He was different from Chu Moli's scholarly appearance. His facial features were delicate, his body was thin, and his skin was pale but delicate. He was worthy of being described as a good girl. But it just so happened that there was a hint of feminine and treacherous viciousness between his brows, causing his entire person to appear ghastly. Under the illumination of the candlelight, Luo Yu, who saw him outside the window, felt her hair stand on end. Yi Chengfeng's lips curled up slightly and he said indifferently, "Take them away." Yi Chengfeng's lips curled up slightly and he said indifferently, "Take them away." Cheng. Lan Yaozong's voice was a little anxious as if he wanted to say something. "You can't call the imperial teacher's name." However, Ye Wang's actions were very rude. He dragged the chair he was sitting on and pulled it out of the door. This chair was not a wheelchair. As he was pulled, the chair fell. Lan Yaozong's head hit the back of the chair, making a muffled sound. "Impudent! How dare you treat me like this? I am..." Before he could finish, Yi Huang stuffed a jujube into his mouth. "Lan Yaozong, do you think you are still the high and mighty emperor of the Lan Empire?" Looking at Lan Yaozong's furious eyes, Yi Huang's lips curled up into a cold and mocking smile. "You are not even as good as a dog in the Lan Emperor city." Lan Yaozong was so angry that his whole body was trembling. He looked at Yi Chengfeng. His eyes were filled with incomparably strong and complicated emotions, and he let out a whimper. Excellent reading, however, Yi Chengfeng did not even look at him. He just indifferently twirled a leaf that floated in from the window. His eyes were distant and dark as if he was already immersed in his own world. Lan Yaozong's eyes looked at Yun Ruhan again. His throat kept making noises, and his eyes were full of pleading and eagerness. However, Yun Ruhan just looked at him coldly. It was like looking at a stranger who had nothing to do with him. Yi Huang dragged the chair and left directly. Luo Yu hid on the roof of the corridor and watched the two leave thoughtfully. However, her attention quickly returned from Lan Yaozong, because Yi Xuan also came to Yun Ruhan's side. However, compared to Yi Huang's rudeness towards Blue Glory sect, Yi Xian's attitude was much better. "Your Highness, please?" Yun Ruhan looked at Yi Chengfeng and said coldly, "Your Highness, Your Highness." Yi Xuan, "Your Highness, please rest assured, the little prince is doing very well. As long as the two of you don't act rashly, no one here will dare to harm you." And then? Yun Ruhan sneered. "Lock me and Shao-Chi up until the end of time? Hee, Your Highness must be joking." Yi Xuan smiled insincerely. Didn't the state preceptor say it very clearly? Luo. If Iliankin hands, he will. Hichi, he said. The imperial tutor has never reneged on his promises. He, and Luo in, and Li, and Yun Luo, and said Luo time tu, and Yun Luo, and Lon Luo said, Luo, and Luo is he. But when he saw Yi Qingfeng, who was still sitting in the room and twirling a leaf, he suppressed his impulse. That restless impulse was firmly suppressed by him. Yun Ruhan quickly disappeared from the room. Alluring Enchantress, heaven-defying baby black-bellied dad, please collect. Chapter 3796. The whole room became deathly quiet. Only the occasional crackling sound came from the candle burning in the corner of the room. Luo Yu was surprised to find that Yi Qingfeng was leaning against the window frame and sleeping with a leaf in his hand. His sleeping posture was like that of a child who lacked a sense of security. His hands were hugging his knees. His hand was still tightly holding the leaf. The night breeze blew in from outside the house, ruffling his thin clothes and casually draped long hair. He looked extremely weak and lonely. Luo Yu moved his numb hands and feet. He couldn't help but throw a stone not far from the room. The person sleeping inside didn't respond. Was he really asleep? If he were to kill him now, wouldn't it be as easy as flipping his hand? But what if this pervert was pretending to be asleep? In the end, the idea of nothing ventured, nothing gained prevailed. Luo Yu silently jumped down from the eaves of the corridor and entered the room. The candle in the room had long burned out. At this time, the night sky was heavy, and the whole room had become dark. But Luo Yu was a golden immortal after all. Even with a bit of starlight outside the window, he could clearly see every table and chair in the room. He carefully approached Yi Qingfeng. The wind outside the window suddenly became stronger, and the leaves and vines outside made rustling sounds. A few leaves were even blown in and landed on Yi Qingfeng's body. Luo Yu was almost scared out of his wits and quickly dodged to the side. However, the wind whistled for a while. Yi Qingfeng, who was leaning against the window, showed no signs of waking up. Luo Yu let out a long sigh of relief. But the frightening moment just now made him retract the idea of killing Yi Qingfeng. The most important thing now was to save eldest senior brother. If he couldn't kill Yi Qingfeng and alerted Yi Aishan and the others, wouldn't he lose more than he gained? Looking at Yi Qingfeng, who was sleeping soundly in the cold wind, Luo Yu couldn't help but make a gesture of slitting his neck and silently mouthed "Ka." Then he bared his teeth, turned around, and quietly walked into the inner room. Not long after Luo Yu left, Yi Qingfeng slowly opened his eyes. Looking at the leaves falling on his body, the corners of his lips curled up slightly. That pair of eyes that were as deep as the abyss lit up for the first time. When Luo Yu entered the room, she realized that it was actually a study. No, rather than calling it a study, it would be more appropriate to call it an art studio. Other than the door that led to the outer room, the entire room was completely sealed. There wasn't even a window. However, there was a yellow rosewood table in the middle of the room. There was nothing on the table, only a huge illumination crystal that illuminated the entire room. Even though Luo Yu was anxious to find Yun Ruhan's whereabouts, she couldn't help but be attracted by the contents of the painting. Starting from the first painting on the wall to the left of the door, rotating counterclockwise, there were a total of 16 paintings hanging in the room. And these 16 paintings actually told a coherent story. As the paintings came into view, he slowly understood the meaning of the paintings. Luo Yu's heart was unknowingly moved by the story in the painting. When he finished looking at the last painting, a strand of indescribable sorrow and worry even surged into his heart. Who are the two main characters in this painting? Are they still alive? Your Highness, would you like to hear me tell you a story? Just as he was feeling melancholic, he suddenly heard a familiar feminine voice. Chapter 3797. Luo Yu was so scared that he almost jumped 3 feet high. The nerves of his whole body instantly tightened. He curled his fingers slightly, which was the action of summoning the puppet. The spiritual power in his body also quickly surged in his dantian, ready to go. Yi Qingfeng, you woke up a long time ago? He said it as a question, but his tone was 100% certain. Yi Qingfeng smiled and didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the last painting and gently touched it with his hand. His action was extremely gentle and cherished, as if he was touching his most precious treasure. Then, Luo Yu heard his gentle voice. Your Highness, do you want to hear it? Luo Yu really wanted to say, no. But he didn't dare to, because he couldn't beat this abnormal state preceptor at all. Most importantly, he really wanted to know who the main character in this painting was and how he was doing now. Yi Qingfeng saw that he was silent and was about to continue. But Luo Yu suddenly raised his hand and said, wait. Yi Qingfeng's brows slightly sank, and he looked at him expressionlessly. He thought he would be greeted with cold and disgusted curses and rejection. Who knew that Luo Yu directly went to the outer room and dragged a chair over, and even took a few plates of pastries and fruits on the table. She didn't care what Yi Qingfeng's reaction was, and directly sat in front of the table. While nibbling on a fruit, she said, okay, now you can start telling the story. Since he couldn't resist, he might as well enjoy it. There were only spiritual fruits and pastries here, and no seeds. The fun of listening to the story was reduced by half. Bad review. For the first time in thousands of years, Yi Qingfeng showed a stunned and bewildered expression. Luo Yu nibbled on a spiritual fruit and kindly reminded him, didn't you say you want to tell a story? I'm ready, you can start. Yi Qingfeng's smile slowly bloomed on his face. His expression seemed helpless and nostalgic. This smile was completely different from his usual cold and treacherous smile. But this smile only lasted for a moment. Then it was covered by his slightly lowered eyelids. He started to use a calm and almost emotionless tone to tell a story that was so long ago that almost everyone had forgotten. 10,000 years ago, on the cultivation continent. Yi knew, go and pour out the night incense in my room. Little bitch, I'm calling you. Do you hear me? The teacup smashed into the young man's face. The boiling hot tea mixed with tea leaves flowed down his forehead and onto his face. Her skin, which was originally so white that it was almost transparent, was scalded by the hot water and even slightly swollen. But the most eye-catching thing was the scar that stretched across his forehead and face. The young man should have been extremely beautiful. But because of this crooked scar that looked like a crawling centipede, it looked extremely hideous and strange, making people unable to look at it directly. Little bitch, why are you looking at me like that? Did he still think that he was the most favored young master of dreaming of death? Hee, take a piss and look at your face. Who wouldn't say it's disgusting? A slut will always be a slut. She dirtied our young master's room. What are you standing there for? Take the night incense and get lost. The youth scooped up a ladle of water and casually poured it down his head. In the cold winter morning, the water was bone-chilling. But he didn't seem to notice. Suddenly, the youth's movements paused and he suddenly raised his head to look. He saw that on the wall of Dreaming of Death, there was a figure sitting at some point. Chapter 3798. The sunlight shone obliquely, as if plaited a halo around the figure. The young man couldn't open his eyes, and instinctively covered his forehead with his hand. His instinctive vigilance made his whole body tense up, and his body subconsciously got into an attacking posture. A low laugh came from above the wall. Then the light and shadow flickered slightly, and a person appeared in front of the young man. When he saw the face of the person in front of him, his pupils involuntarily shrank. It was an extremely handsome young man, who looked like he was in his early 20s. His clothes were gorgeous and exquisite, and he wore a long sword, which was obviously an extraordinary item with surging spiritual power. But the temperament of his body was indescribably clean and clear, especially that pair of eyes. They were dark and clear, warm and clear, like the purest obsidian in the world. The young man was stunned for a moment and couldn't come to his senses for a long time. Until the person in front of him let out a low and sweet laugh. Little guy, what's your name? The young man's thoughts suddenly came back. His whole body returned to a tense attacking posture. But he still answered subconsciously, "Ye knew." The young man was startled. "Ye knew." The young man nodded and said in a low voice, "Ye as in the knight, slave as in the servant." The young man frowned, and his eyes fell on the scar between his eyebrows. For the first time, Ye knew felt ashamed of his inferiority. He turned his head subconsciously and wanted to cover the ugly scar on his face with his forehead hair. The young man suddenly said, "Ye knew, have you ever thought about a completely different life?" Ye knew was startled. Looking into the young man's clear eyes, he felt as if someone was using a feather to gently flutter his heart. Had he ever thought about a completely different life? How could he not? He dreamed about it even in his dreams. But what was the point of thinking about it? Since he could remember, he had already been sold to this drunk and dreaming. Before his face was ruined, the club was willing to feed him well and sell him for a good price. But before he could be sold, his face was ruined. Since then, no one coveted him anymore. But he also became the lowest servant, and anyone in the club could beat and humiliate him at will. He was not a masochist. Why would he want to continue living like this? But at the same time, he understood the fickleness of the world better than anyone else. There was no free lunch in the world. Ye Knew's eyes were filled with mockery. So what if I want to? So what if I don't want it? The young man didn't seem to notice his sharpness. The smile on his face was still gentle and calm. "If you want, I can take you away from here." But the night slave frowned and looked at him. "I'm not related to you and he laughed self-deprecatingly. "You're just an ugly piece of trash. Why are you helping me?" "Do I need a reason to help someone?" The young man pursed his lips, revealing a childish willfulness on his face. "I'll help people if I like. I'll help whoever I like. Why do I need a reason? I just find you pleasing to the eye, and I want to fulfill one of your wishes. Can't I?" The young man stretched out his slender fingers and pointed at his eyes. The corners of his lips curled up slightly. "I suddenly had the idea to land and rest. Then I just happened to land in this small courtyard and saw you. Perhaps this was fate destined by the heavens? And I like your eyes very much. Isn't this a good reason?" Chapter 3799. Ye Knew's face turned red at once. His ears were on fire. Almost subconsciously, he wanted to touch his eyes. The young man's words, "I like your eyes very much," kept echoing in his mind. This person? Did this person know what he was talking about? "Ye Knew, are you willing to go with me?" Hearing the young man's voice again, Ye Knew raised his head and was stunned for a moment. It was because of the warm smile on the young man's face, and also because of the light without a trace of malice in his eyes. He moved his chapped lips and was about to answer. Suddenly, a sharp voice came from behind him. "Ye Knew? Ye Knew, come here quickly. I have a good news for you. Do you still remember Elder 2 who came to my dream of drunken life a few days ago? He's the elder of Gentle Wind sect 5 miles away. He said that he wants you to accompany him. He said that he doesn't mind your ugly appearance. As long as you can serve him well, he's willing to bring you back to Gentle Wind sect and let you take the elixir to cleanse your muscles and marrow. Your luck has turned for the better now, kid. Ye Knew, bastard. Where are you? Answer me if you hear me." The moment he heard the sharp voice, Ye Knew's heart that had just warmed up felt as if it was poured with a basin of ice water. It was bone-chilling. The corner of his mouth curved into a self-deprecating smile. He thought to himself, "Ye Knew, what were you thinking just now?" The person in front of him looked like a high and mighty immortal cultivator. Haughty bouquets for himself, he was just a filthy, ugly freak in the lowest brothel who could be stepped on by anyone. His eyes fell on the young man's outstretched hand. Slender, fair, well-proportioned joints, every inch of it was perfect like a work of art. Then he looked at his hand that was full of mottled calluses and seemed to emit a foul smell. It was as if touching the young man lightly was already blasphemy. The sound of hurried footsteps approached from afar, accompanied by a flattering voice. "Elder 2, don't worry. It's the good fortune that Slave Ye has accumulated in his past life to be able to follow you. If he were to find out about this, he would be delighted. You just need to wait in the front hall." Why bother to find him yourself? Yi Nu's expression changed and he pushed the young man away in panic. Leave this place. The young man was stunned by the push. Yi Nu couldn't help looking back, looking more anxious, but his tone was still extremely rational and calm. Tu Biaobing, an elder of the Wind sect, 67 years old at the high level of the Yuaning realm. By nature, she liked young and beautiful men and took pleasure in torturing them. This news was known to everyone within a radius of several dozen li. Have you never heard of it? The young man shook his head innocently. It's not like I don't live nearby. The night slave was exasperated when he saw Meng Qi's unhurried manner. Do you know what would happen to a clean and good-looking cultivator like you with a low cultivation level if you were to fall into his hands? Ordinary people like them were taken away by Tu Biaobing, and they were only tortured. But when those small cultivators that passed by fell into Tu Biaobing's hands, not only were they tortured, they were even taken as cultivation furnaces and sucked dry, causing practically all of them to die extremely miserable deaths in the end. The young man blinked and said with a smile, "Thank you for your compliment." Only then did Yi Nu notice that there were actually dimples on the young man's face when he smiled. The originally gentle and elegant young man was infected with childishness in an instant. Chapter 3800. Yi Nu suddenly came to his senses, and his face turned livid. What the fuck is this? He was still concerned about whether or not she had dimples. Yi Nu grabbed the young man's wrist and was about to take him away from the back door. However, he was still one step too late. Little bastard, you're here. Didn't you hear me calling you for a long time? You didn't even respond. Elder Tu is here, come and greet him. Yi Nu's body suddenly froze. Looking at the few people walking towards him, he unconsciously clenched his teeth. Because he saw Tu Biaobing. His evil eyes swept past him and fell on the young man. His eyes were filled with excitement and greed. The night slave's heart sank. Suddenly, he had the courage to open the door behind him and pushed the young man out. I said you're in the wrong place, get out. After that, he closed the door and faced Elder Tu with a sullen face. Elder Tu's face was obviously gloomy at this time. The steward of Drunk and Dreaming knew how to read the situation. Seeing this, he slapped Yi Nu's face hard. Little bastard, I'm talking to you, didn't you hear me? Who asked you to let outsiders in? Who asked you to let people go so casually? What kind of place do you think Drunk and Dreaming is? You can come and go as you please? The slap with 100% strength was about to fall on Yi Nu's face. Suddenly, a bang came from behind. The door that was closed and locked by Yi Nu was opened by itself. Yi Nu felt a huge suction coming from behind. Then, his body involuntarily soared into the air and flew backwards. A hand gently supported him from behind. He could feel the softness and warmth of that hand through the thin cloth. Qian. Before Night Slave could react to what had happened, his extremely thin wrist was grabbed by someone. A low and sweet voice rang in his ears. Are you ready? What? What preparation? The thought just flashed in Yi Nu's mind, and before he could say it out, his feet had left the ground again, and his body was flying high in the air. His head felt heavy and his feet felt light. The feeling of being unable to control his own body caused a rare trace of panic to appear in his usually calm eyes. But soon he realized what had happened. He was flying. It should be said that the young man was flying with him. The two of them were standing on a large gray bird. However, there were no feathers on the back of the bird. Instead, it was smooth and hard, just like a stone. Seeing Yi Nu staring at the bird under his feet in a daze, the young man smiled and said, "This is a flying golem. The flight speed was not fast, but it was very stable. Are you afraid?" The night slave stared blankly at the young man. He didn't know what a puppet beast was. For some reason, the ground beneath their feet was rapidly receding, but the young man said that their flying speed was not fast. He was in a trance and was in a daze. At this moment, it still felt like a dream. Did he really leave dreaming or drunk? It was that simple and effortless. And he even tasted the feeling of riding the clouds like a cultivator? Yi Nu had a vague feeling that his life had been turned upside down from this moment onwards. And all of this was given to him by the young man before him. His cracked and pale lips moved. The night slave didn't answer the young man. Instead, he asked in a slightly hoarse voice, "Who are you?" Chapter 3801. Was he an immortal sent by the heavens to save him? Or was it just a dream? When the young man heard this question, he pursed his lips and fell silent for a moment. Then he curled his lips and said softly, "My name is Lan Chushi, a puppet master. I'm very happy to meet you today." On the street where people were shuttling back and forth, a handsome man led an ugly young man with a scar on his face through the crowd. The man had a gentle temperament, like a gentle warm breeze in spring. The youth behind him, however, was filled with coldness and vigilance. It was as if he was guarding against anyone who approached him. Only when he looked at the young man in front of him would his eyes show a trace of gentleness. Elixir Pavilion found it. Lan Chushi stopped in front of a pharmacy with a joyful expression on his face. Yi Nu asked doubtfully, "Young master, you want to buy elixirs?" Lan Chushi sighed and said, "I told you not to call me young master. I'm a few years older than you, call me brother." Yi Nu blushed. He chewed on the word, brother, and was a little dazed for a moment. "Shopkeeper, I heard that Elixir Pavilion has an exclusive rejuvenation pill for sale, is that right?" After a quarter of an hour, Lan Chushi spent 200,000 crystals to buy a rejuvenation pill and handed it to Yi Nu. Yi Nu asked, "What's this?" Lan Chushi smiled and said, "Rejuvenation pill is not a precious elixir that's difficult to refine. It's just that the elixir formula is passed down from a small sect and I'm not good at refining it, so I came here to buy one. As long as you take it, the scar on your face will disappear." Yi Nu tightened his grip on the porcelain bottle. There was some uncontrollable bitterness and pain in his voice. "So, you also think I'm ugly?" Lan Chushi was startled. Then he could not help but pinch the young man's face. "Xiao Yi, you're a good person, but you're too sensitive. Why would I think you're ugly? Our Xiao Yi is the cutest." The young man's fingers were soft and warm. Yi Nu's face suddenly turned red and he did not know where to put his hands and feet. That trace of pain and anger just now disappeared without a trace in an instant. Lan Chushi continued, "I don't care if you have scars on your face, but Xiao Yi, you do. I don't want you to always feel inferior about your looks. Of course, if you don't like it, The night slave retracted his hand abruptly and held the porcelain bottle tightly to his back. His voice was as soft as a mosquito's. "No, I like it very much. As long as you give me something I like it." The night breeze was gentle, bringing with it a trace of refreshing coolness. Lan Chushi stood alone in the night breeze and looked at the vast night sky in the distance. A trace of worry slowly appeared between his brows. His hand gently caressed a pendant on his waist. The ornament was an extremely exquisite silver halberd. It was only the size of a palm, but if one used one's divine sense to sense it carefully, one would be able to feel a pressure that was like a monstrous wave assaulting one's face. Lan Chushi's slender fingers gently brushed across the markings of the halberd as he murmured with some agony and anxiety, Father, can you please give up?" Suddenly, he heard footsteps behind him. Lan Chushi suddenly came back to his senses. He withdrew his hand from the halberd and turned around subconsciously. "Xiao Yi, have you already taken the facial restoration pill? The medicinal effect is—" The gentle voice stopped abruptly. Lan Chushi stared blankly at the tall and handsome young man in front of him. For a moment, he seemed to have lost the ability to think and speak. Chapter 3802. Under the moonlight, the young man's skin was as fair as the bright moon, making his red lips look even more plump and alluring. The ferocious scar between his brows, along with the traces of hardships on his face and hands, had disappeared without a trace. Thus, the pair of bright almond-shaped eyes became prominent. Lan Chushi had seen the description of the spiritual monsters in the mountains in the picture books. They were full of charm and captivated one's soul. At that time, he could not imagine how the spiritual monsters looked like. At this moment, Those words appeared in his mind unconsciously. Yi Nu's chest was thumping and his heart was in a mess under his gaze. She wondered if it was because she looked too ugly that she scared Lan Chushi. He was a sensitive and decisive person. Just as the bad thought rose in his mind, he suddenly clenched his fists and turned to leave. "Wait!" Lan Chushi quickly pulled him back. "Why are you running? I haven't seen your original appearance clearly." Yi Nu gritted his teeth and said, "Don't you think I look ugly? You don't even want to talk to me about the paintings." Lan Chushi could not help but laugh. "What are you thinking about every day in that little brain of yours? I just didn't expect my little Yi to be such a handsome and pretty man. When you grow up in the future, you will definitely charm thousands of girls." Yi Nu blushed when he heard the first half of his sentence. His eyes revealed a shy joy. But when he heard the second half, his face suddenly darkened and he said stiffly, "I have grown up, and I have no interest in charming anyone." Lan Chushi looked at him helplessly. Yi Nu was good at everything. He was smart, eager to learn, and even his talent in cultivation was top-notch. He had only been by his side for half a year, but he had already advanced from a mortal to the stage of fasting. There was only one thing that made Lan Chushi very helpless. Wheel Literature Network, this little fellow was very wary of people. Regardless of whether it was a man or a woman, gentle or rude, he would always look at those people with vigilance. Even when someone tried to get close to the two of them, the murderous intent he exuded was so strong that Lan Chushi could not even ignore it. Only when facing him would Yi Nu show the gentleness and naivety that a young man should have. But when he thought of Yi Nu's childhood experiences, Lan Chushi could not bring himself to blame him. He only felt heartache. She only hoped that after a long time, the knot in his heart could be fully untied so that he could live like a normal child. Lan Chushi was about to reach out and pat the young man's head, instructing him to rest early. However, his expression suddenly changed. "Shall ye hide in the house? Don't come out without my permission." Without waiting for Yi Nu's response, Lan Chushi grabbed his wrist and threw him into the house. At the same time, his hands quickly formed a seal, and a huge white ape puppet appeared in front of the door. The night slave wanted to rush out, but he was firmly blocked and protected by the white ape. Almost at the same time, dozens of figures descended from the top of the wall and surrounded Lan Chushi. As soon as these dozens of people appeared, it was as if the entire courtyard was filled with powerful air currents. A strong gust of wind blew, and the pressure was monstrous. Even though he was protected by the white ape puppet, Night Slave felt as if his internal organs were being crushed by a huge pressure. These people's cultivation bases were obviously very high. They were so high that Yi Nu could not see through them at all. Obviously, these people did not take a young man in the stage of fasting seriously. Chapter 3803. But their behavior was very respectful. Almost everyone lowered their heads and bowed to Lan Chushi. "I've long heard of young Master Lan's name. It's our honor to be able to meet you today." Lan Chushi looked at these people expressionlessly and did not speak. The attitude of these people was still extremely respectful. The leader took a step forward and bowed, saying, "We're Taoist friends from the Vast Sea Alliance. I'm Zhou Jintian, the leader of the Sea Shark sect. We're here today to invite young Master Lan to stay in our sect. I wonder if young Master Lan would do us the honor?" Lan Chushi said lightly, "What if I don't go?" "Hi, young Master Lan, why are you so unreasonable? We're also inviting you with good intentions to form a good relationship with Senior Lan. Young Master Lan is so unapproachable. Do you have no respect for the Vast Sea Alliance?" Lan Chushi sneered, "Who do you think you are? Why should I have any respect for you?" Yi Nu, who was blocked by the white ape in the room, was stunned when he saw this scene. He had never seen Lan Chushi like this before. He was high and mighty, confident and disdainful. Obviously, these people had such high cultivation and were outnumbered, but it seemed that they were not taken seriously by this gentle and weak young man. Sure enough, Lan Chushi's words made these people from the Vast Sea Alliance furious. "Lan Chushi, who do you think you are? If not for the fact that you're the only son of Lan Xiaozi, do you think you're qualified to be on equal footing with us? You're just a greenhorn. Do you know what our cultivation is? We're cultivators who have passed the tribulation. We've come to invite you nicely, but you don't know what's good for you? Do you really think we can't do anything to you? Ha, I advise you not to refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit. Lan Chushi swung his roar slowly. The night wind blew his clothes and black hair. The corners of his mouth slowly curled into a calm and disdainful smile. Then come and try. How do you want me to drink the forfeit? In the next hour, the shock subverted Yi Nu's understanding. He never knew that there was a puppet master who could be as strong as Lan Chushi. Everything in the world was under his control. Every blade of grass and every tree was a puppet that he could control with ease. A young man who looked to be in his 20s was fighting against 5 tribulation-transcending cultivators and more than 10 leaving aperture cultivators, but he was not at a disadvantage at all. However, this battle was obviously not going to be easy. Yi Nu watched helplessly as the young man's clothes were dyed bright red. The powerful puppets were destroyed one by one. More and more wounds appeared on his body. His eyes were crimson red, and the violent rage in his chest almost made him lose all reason. At this moment, he just wanted to rush out and tear these people who dared to hurt the young man into pieces. Ever since his life had been turned upside down, the night slave had never had a clear goal. In other words, other than following Lan Chushi, he had no other desires. But at this moment, there was a crazy thought burning in his heart. He wanted to become stronger. He wanted to become stronger than anyone, even stronger than Lan Chushi. This was the only way he could protect this person from any harm. The night slave slapped the white ape with all his might, hoping that it would let him out so that it could help Lan Chushi. However, the white ape was a puppet without any intelligence. Lan Chushi was the only master who could control it, so why would it listen to the night slave? Chapter 3804. However, just as Lan Chushi fell into a disadvantageous position and was in imminent danger, a white pearl floated out from behind him, releasing a dazzling light. The huge white divine beast soared into the sky. The blood-red horn looked like a raging flame under the bright moonlight. His ice-cold inorganic eyes looked down, as if he was looking at the smallest ant. How can it be the divine beast Bai Zhe? Isn't Lan Xiaozi the only one who can summon Bai Zhe? Why can his son, Lan Chushi, do it too? No, this is impossible. Impossible. Everyone knew that Lan Chushi was only a puppet master. How could he summon the divine beast Bai Zhe? Was Lan Xiaozi here? Yes, it must be Lan Xiaozi. The people of the vast Sea Alliance were getting more and more shocked as they fought with Lan Chushi. In the cultivation continent where the stairway to heaven was broken, all cultivators were unable to ascend. Indeed, it could be said that cultivators who were undergoing tribulation could be seen everywhere. But how old was Lan Chushi? Everyone in the world knew that the legendary summoner in the cultivation world, Lan Xiaozi, only had a son with his wife after he was over 60 years old. Now, Lan Chushi was only 30 years old, but he could already fight evenly with the 5 tribulation-passing cultivators. Hence, the moment they saw the divine beast Bai Zhe, the psychological defense of those people in the vast Ocean Alliance completely collapsed. They were no longer able to tell if Lan Chushi was really so powerful or if Lan Xiaozi had come looking for him. All of them fled in panic. When all of them had run away, they were nowhere to be seen. The pale-faced Lan Chushi's body swayed. He could no longer support himself and fell to the ground. Chushi. The night slave did not know where he got the strength from. It actually knocked away the white ape puppet that was blocking the door and rushed in front of Lan Chushi, hugging him. Lan Chushi panted slightly. He took out a pill from his pocket and swallowed it. Only then did he regain some strength. The night slave looked like he was about to cry. His heart softened a little, and he couldn't help but reach out to touch his forehead. You're so rude. Call me Big Brother. Seeing his smile, the night slave felt that his heart, which had been boiling in a pot of oil, had finally returned to its original place. However, when he saw the young man's pale face and the blood stain at the corner of his mouth, he unconsciously clenched his fists tightly, his nails digging deep into his palms. The night slave said hoarsely, "Chu Shi, I want to become stronger. I don't want to be as powerless as I am today." Lan Chushi looked at the burning flames in the youth's eyes and was momentarily stunned. He even forgot to correct the way he addressed him. A warm feeling welled up in his heart, because he knew that the young man wanted to become stronger in order to protect him. Just as he was about to speak, a few figures flew over from the distant horizon and knelt before Lan Chushi. "Young master, we've finally found you. Master and madam are going crazy looking for you. Young master, when you run away from home in the future, don't be alone. Can you bring the four of us with you? Sob sob sob, without you, our days in the Lan family are too difficult." It was only after this night that Slave Yi knew what the name Lan Chushi meant in the cultivation land. He was the only son of the cultivation land's #1 summoner, the #1 genius, and the #1 powerhouse, Lan Xiaozi. 1,000 years ago, the heavenly ladder had collapsed in a great battle. All the cultivators on the continent had no way to transcend the tribulation and ascend. Chapter 3805. All the cultivators on the cultivation continent had fallen into a desperate situation with no way out. Until a few decades ago, Lan Xiaozi appeared out of nowhere. He once said that heaven and earth would be a prison, trapping them in this world. Then he would poke a hole in the sky. Of course, at that time, no one would take such nonsense to heart. Until Lan Xiaozi became the summoner that dominated the entire cultivation continent. He could summon an army of ferocious beasts and destroy a dynasty overnight. He could even summon the true body of the ancient divine beast, Bai Zhe. As Bai Zhe roared, heaven and earth shook, and even the sky seemed to crack. At that time, everyone had a thought. If there was someone in the world who could poke a hole in the sky, if there was someone who could find a way out for the trapped cultivators on the cultivation continent, it would be Lan Xiaozi. But how could it be easy to fight against heaven? Even if he succeeded, what kind of price would Lan Xiaozi have to pay? Lan Xiaozi was not stupid. What right did he have to sacrifice his own life to pave a smooth path for others? However, this thought changed after his only son, Lan Chushi, was born. Lan Xiaozi was talented himself, but his son's talent was not inferior to his. Lan Chushi was not only a genius summoner, but also a puppet master who had awakened the mirror realm. In a short 30 years he had stepped into the threshold of the tribulation stage. Ordinary cultivators of the same level were no match for him. If the heavenly ladder had not broken, he might have been able to transcend the tribulation and ascend in a few years. Lan Xiaozi could tolerate dying of old age on the cultivation continent. But how could he accept that his precious son was also trapped in this world to death? Therefore, a new rumor spread in the cultivation continent. Lan Xiaozi wanted to use his flesh and Bai Zhe's beast soul as a sacrifice to create a stepping stone to the cultivation continent. A floating island that floated under the cultivation continent, outside the control of the heavenly Tao. On this island, there was not only spiritual power, but also celestial power from the cultivation continent. All the cultivators who were trapped on the cultivation continent would have a chance to ascend to the immortal realm once they boarded the floating island. In order to board the floating island, one had to obtain Lan Xiaozi's permission. When he offered his sacrifice, he would be sent up together with Lan Chushi. One could imagine how crazy the entire cultivation world would be when such news came out. All the cultivators were fighting for the right to study with the crown prince. If the soft approach didn't work, then the hard approach would work. If force doesn't work, then use connections. As long as they could get Lan Xiaozi to leave a spot for them, they would do anything. Under the moonlight, Yi Nu stared unblinkingly at the young man in front of him, his fists clenched unconsciously. He didn't care about the secret that could make all the cultivators on the continent go crazy. He only knew that the young man in front of him was sad. I can understand martial uncles, cousin brothers, and cousin brothers' desire to break through and ascend, to break free from this world. But they never thought that all of this would be exchanged for my father's life. Lan Chushi tightened his grip on the silver halberd hanging on his waist. His eyes revealed a deep sadness. I don't want to ascend to become an immortal at all. I just want my father to be alive. But everyone tells me that my thinking is wrong, that I'm selfish, that I've let down my father's ardent expectations of me. Chapter 3806. Little Yi, did I really do something wrong? The corner of Yi Nu's lips curled up, revealing a disdainful sneer. Their words sound nice, but in fact, they are a group of selfish and shameless people. If they say this again next time, just tell them that you don't need anyone to accompany you. Even if your father really makes a floating island, it's enough for you to ascend alone. At that time, you'll see what kind of faces they'll have. Before Lan Chushi could react, the four people sitting at the side could not help but laugh out loud. Young Master Ye's words are crude, but the truth is not. The Lan family and the Xiao family are really greedy. Young Master, you can tell Master and Madam what you are thinking. They love you so much, as long as you say it nicely, they will definitely understand. Don't leave without saying goodbye again. You don't know how sad Madam is. There are a few more white hairs on her head. Lan Chushi's eyes were slightly red, and he lowered his head in shame. I know. I will set off for home tomorrow. After that, he looked up at Yi Nu and said, Little Yi, come back with me, I want to introduce you to my father and mother. Yi Nu moved his lips, wanting to refuse. What was his identity? Lowly, dirty, and unbearable. How could he go to a place like the Lan family? However, when he met Lan Chushi's gaze, he swallowed his words of refusal and nodded slightly. He thought that as long as he could stay with the young man, no matter how unbearable it was, no matter how torturous it was, he would definitely be able to persevere. Lan Chushi did not want to use his father's life to exchange for his own bright future. However, fate seemed to have set a fixed trajectory, and the parting of life and death was not up to anyone's control. Lan Xiaozi suddenly contracted a strange disease, and he tried all kinds of methods but could not cure it. He was originally convinced by his son, and he no longer wanted to sacrifice himself to fight for a chance for his son to ascend. However, his own life was at stake now. His beloved wife was only a mortal, and after he died, even if he used elixirs to nourish her, she would not live long. At that time, how could he be willing to leave his son to die alone on this continent? In the end, Lan Xiaozi still initiated the sacrifice. Myriad heavenly divergent beasts return, mountains and rivers appear in the void. I, Lan Xiaozi, am willing to offer my insignificant body as a sacrifice to the heavens. My soul will be in the river of forgetfulness, and I will have no regrets in this life. Just to give my son a stairway to heaven. 7 days later, you can step on my corpse and board the floating island to begin your brand new path of cultivation. I only ask of you one thing. You must protect my son, Chu Shi. Don't let anyone bully him. Otherwise, even if my soul falls into the river of forgetfulness and becomes a malicious spirit, I will definitely come back to claim your lives. Countless bolts of lightning fell from the sky, smashing onto Lan Xiaozi's frail and old body. The huge divine beast, Baze, let out a furious roar behind him. Its figure gradually faded and merged with Lan Chushi. Father! Lan Chushi let out a shrill cry and wanted to rush over to stop him, but he was held tightly by the person behind him. The deep voice rang in his ears again and again. Chu Shi, don't go over there. It was the night slave who held him back. Spring passed and autumn came. Several winters and summers passed in the blink of an eye. The frail young man in drunk life and dreaming death, back then had grown into a handsome young man with unparalleled beauty. Chapter 3807. Over the past few years, Yi Nu's cultivation level had improved by leaps and bounds. He was already a leaving body stage cultivator. However, compared to Lan Chushi's cultivation level, he was still far from it. Under Lan Chushi's struggle, his body was soon covered with injuries. However, he seemed to be unaware of it. Blood flowed from his forehead and arms, but he did not loosen his grip on the young man. He kept repeating, Chushi, you can't go over. The sky gradually darkened. The dense lightning illuminated Lan Chushi's tear-stained face. He finally accepted the reality that his father would never come back. His mother, when she knew his father's determination, chose to live and die with her beloved husband. Overnight, he, Lan Chushi, became an orphan without a father or mother. Around him, the people who were watching the heavenly lightning strike his father's body. Their faces were filled with sadness, reluctance, and guilt. However, they were mostly agitated and elated. That was because they finally had the chance to ascend and become immortals again. Lan Chushi's heart turned cold as he looked at the expressions of these people. However, when he met Yinu's concerned gaze, he could not help but feel a surge of warmth and sorrow. He grabbed Yinu's hand, his tears falling uncontrollably. "Little Yi, from now on, I have no father and no mother. You still have me." The pair of grown, slender, and powerful hands held him tightly, his eyes focused and persistent. "Chushi, in life or in death, I will be by your side. My life has changed because of you. Henceforth, you are my sky, my life, and my faith, which I have staked everything on. No one can take me away from you, even if I die." 7 days later. "Are you kidding me? The quota to the floating island is so precious. Who does that wretched Yinu think he is? How can he be qualified to go with us? Cousin, have you been deceived by this brat? I can tell that he approached you with ulterior motives from the start." "That's right. Our Lan clan and the Shao clan had so many people, but we couldn't even get a spot. This kid is an outsider, and he hasn't even reached the tribulation passing stage, but he can go to the floating island with us. Oh, by the way, Tian, Di, Xian, and Huang are just slaves. It's fine to bring one, but wouldn't it be too much to bring all 4? In my opinion, my Luo family has put in a lot of effort for this sacrifice. We were the ones who found all the precious spirit herbs. Shouldn't my Luo family take up more of the quota?" But the heaven-piercing halberd was refined by our Xiang clan for Senior Lan. Naturally, our Xiang clan is the only one who can get more spots. My Wei family has been by Master's side ever since he was insignificant. Master has always valued us the most. In terms of relationship and contribution, how can you compare to my Wei family?" Lan Chushi looked coldly at these people who were quarreling. His eyes were filled with mockery. His ice-cold fingers gently stroked the silver halberd at his waist, and he suddenly shouted, "All of you, shut up. I don't care how many people you bring and how many slots you want. I must bring Shao Yi, Tian, Di, Xian, and Huang. What does it have to do with me whether you agree or not?" The people who were quarreling paused, and their faces immediately turned ugly. A Lan clan elder was about to teach him a lesson with a sullen face. "Chushi, this is how you talk to your elders." Chapter 3808. Before he could finish his sentence, Lan Chushi sneered, "Shao Yi, heaven, earth, Xian, and Huang. If one of them is left behind, then the floating island will no longer exist. I'm a man of my words. As for the rest, do as you see fit." After saying that, Lan Chushi flicked his sleeves and left before anyone could react. As he walked along the corridor, he looked up at the sky far away. It was all red there, and there were tiny thunderbolts falling from time to time. It was as if a hole had been poked in the sky. According to Lan Xiao's prediction before he died, the hole would disappear in another 3 days. The space barrier was closed again. The floating island was completely stabilized. By then, he could use the small heavenly halberd at his waist to go to the floating island. However, the small heavenly halberd could not carry many people. That was why those people were fighting so hard for a spot. Lan Chushi closed his eyes. 3 days later, he would leave this land. As for his father, he had completely left him. Suddenly, a warm cloak was draped over him. Lan Chushi turned around and met Yinu's deep and focused gaze. A faint smile appeared on his face. Yinu said softly, "I heard the quarrel inside. Chushi, you don't have to quarrel with them because of me. I'm not qualified to." Before he could finish his sentence, he was pressed down by a hand. Lan Chushi looked at him coldly, and he seemed to be a little angry. "Shao Yi, I thought you knew." Yinu felt the hand on his lips. His mind was in a mess, and he even lost the ability to think. Lan Chushi's voice was slightly hoarse. I don't have a father anymore. In this world, only you and heaven, earth, Xian, and Huang are the most important family to me. Yi Nu automatically filtered out the words heaven, earth, Xian, and Huang. Once he thought that he was the most important person to Chu Shi, he could not control his wildly beating heart. Lan Chushi retracted his hand and looked at him with a focused and deep gaze. He said word by word, Chu Shi's life is shared with you. Xiao Yi, believe me. I'll definitely bring you to the floating island. Yi Nu clenched and loosened his fists tightly. After a while, he found his voice again. I believe you. In this world, I don't believe in ghosts, gods, or Buddha. I only believe in you, Lan Chushi. Furthermore, he had lied just now. Even if Lan Chushi was not prepared to bring him to the floating island, he would definitely follow. No matter what method he had to use, even if he had to beg, crawl, or kneel, he had to stay by Lan Chushi's side. Luo Yu swallowed the last piece of cake. She stared at the man in front of her, waiting for him to continue. However, after waiting for a long time, Yi Qingfeng did not speak again. And then, Luo Yu could not help but ask, did Lan Chushi bring Knight's slave to the floating island? Yi Qingfeng withdrew his line of sight from the painting. His long eyelashes drooped down slightly, covering the divine light in his eyes. You really want to know? Luo Yu couldn't help but roll her eyes. Isn't that obvious? Who would want to listen to a story that's only half done? Yi Qingfeng looked up at him and said slowly, listening to a story or meeting the first prince. If you have to choose one, what would you choose? Luo Yu jumped up from her chair. You're willing to let me see eldest senior brother? Nonsense. Was there even a need to choose? Of course, I'll choose eldest senior brother. Yi Qingfeng's face turned slightly gloomy, but he did not speak. Luo Yu frowned and said, Hey, you asked the question just now. Are you going to go back on your words now that I've chosen you? Aren't you ashamed to go back on your words as a state preceptor? Chapter 3809. Yi Qingfeng gave him a sidelong glance. As if saying, Do you think I'm embarrassed? Luo Yu wanted to burst into tears. He almost forgot that this guy was a black-bellied and shameless pervert like his third senior brother. Yi Qingfeng suddenly turned around and lightly knocked on the wall. The next moment, he heard a cracking sound from under his feet. Then, in the middle of the room, below the table, there was a slanted staircase that extended downwards. Yi Qingfeng gently pushed the rosewood table away, then took a candle from the outer room and walked into the tunnel. Why aren't you following me? Yi Qingfeng raised his eyebrows. Don't you want to see your eldest senior brother? I'll bring you to see him. Luo Yu quickly came back to his senses. He didn't have time to think about Yi Qingfeng's purpose and hurriedly followed him. The corridor that extended downwards was very long. Moreover, the surroundings were pitch black and silent. Only the candle in Yi Qingfeng's hand emitted a dim yellow light. Luo Yu regretted for the 100th time that he didn't take the illumination crystal on the table. This perverted grand tutor was really something. Since it was all for illumination, why didn't he take the shiny illumination crystal? Instead, he took this pitiful candle with a small flame. Was he going to act out a midnight thriller in this corridor? Luo Yu made a face at the back of the figure in front of him, then made a gesture of cutting off his head with a sword. Who knew that Yi Qingfeng suddenly turned around as if he had eyes on the back of his head. Under the dim light, one could see that there was a hint of a smile in his eyes. What are you doing? Luo Yu awkwardly retracted his hand and laughed dryly. Nothing, just chasing away flies. I say, how long is this corridor? Can't you walk faster? Yi Qingfeng didn't expose her. There wasn't even a fly here. He just turned around and continued to walk forward, but his pace was a little faster. Luo Yu hurriedly followed. Thinking that he would be able to see eldest senior brother soon, he couldn't help but feel excited. Little Highness, do you hate me? Just as he was deep in thought, he suddenly heard Yi Qingfeng's slightly low and hoarse voice. Luo Yu was stunned. It took her a while to realize what he was asking her. He slightly frowned, then calmed himself down and said slowly, In this world, the most important thing to me is the Xiaoyao sect. My master is called Shi Qing, formerly known as Yuan Qing. He raised me for more than 10 years and treated me like his own son, but he died at the hands of Phantom Thorn. Yi Qingfeng was stunned. He turned around and asked, "Who's Phantom Sting?" Luo Yu was confused by his question. Then he was seething with anger. "Didn't you send Phantom Thorn to kill me and eldest senior brother? Now you're asking me who I am?" Only then did Yi Qingfeng reveal an expression of realization. With an indifferent expression he said, "Unimportant small fries, I usually don't pay much attention to them." Luo Yu only felt a ball of anger rushing to her brain. It made him almost unable to restrain the killing intent in his heart. An unimportant lackey, with just a simple order from Yi Qingfeng, took away the life of his most respected master. But in the end he still restrained himself, because he knew that he was no match for Yi Qingfeng. And eldest senior brother's life was still in the hands of this person. For the rest of the journey, the two of them didn't speak anymore. The surrounding was frighteningly quiet. Until the scene in front of them suddenly opened up. It was an elegantly decorated stone room. In the middle of the stone room, a young man was sitting by the window, staring blankly at the ice soul sword in his hand. Chapter 38:10. Eldest Senior Brother. Luo Yu's voice suddenly rose by an octave, and she leapt towards Yun Ruhan excitedly. "Shao Qi." Seeing Luo Yu standing in front of her, Yun Ruhan was surprised. "Why are you here?" Her gaze landed on Yi Qingfeng. Yun Ruhan's expression changed. She quickly shielded Luo Yu behind her and stared coldly at the terrifying man in front of her. "Yi Qingfeng, what do you want?" There was no emotion in Yi Qingfeng's eyes as he looked at the two coldly. "His Highness said he wanted to see you, so I brought him here." "What? Is your Highness not satisfied?" Yun Ruhan frowned, but the vigilance in her eyes didn't fade. The ice soul sword in her hand emitted a faint cold light. Yi Qingfeng's gaze landed on Luo Yu as he said calmly, "Phantom Thorn was under my orders, but I didn't tell him to kill them all." Then, before the two could react, his figure suddenly disappeared. What did he mean? Luo Yu was confused. "Your Highness, you don't know." A low, hoarse voice suddenly came from beside her. Luo Yu subconsciously turned to look. Seeing a face uglier than a ghost, she was almost scared to death. "Yiaxuan? When did you get here?" Yiaxuan smiled slightly and treated Luo Yu respectfully. "This subordinate was ordered by the Imperial Advisor to look after your Highness. If I'm not here, where else could I be?" Pausing for a moment, he pulled out a mocking smile and said, "Back then, the Shao family was slaughtered. Of course, it was Imperial Teacher who pushed it, but Blue Glory Sect also felt that the Shao family and the Wei family were too powerful. They were wary of them and wanted to use this chance to uproot them. Because of this, when the Shao family fell, everyone in the Imperial Court and in the Empire came to understand the Imperial Advisor's intentions and hit them when they were down. But in reality, the Imperial Advisor wasn't interested in counting how many people there were in the Shao and Wei families. He even forgot what Shi Yuanqing looked like, let alone killing them all." When Yiaxuan said this, he smiled slightly. This subordinate is not saying this to defend the Imperial Tutor, but everything in the world must have a cause and effect. I hope that Little Highness can understand that there are many things that the Imperial Tutor has no choice but to do. After saying that, his figure also disappeared on the spot. But Yun Ruhan and Luo Yu both knew that he was nearby, watching over them. Unless their strength surpasses Yi Qingfeng's, or Mu Yen uses the Avicii Pagoda to exchange for it, they might not be able to leave this place for the time being. Ridiculous. When Yiaxuan disappeared completely, Luo Yu wrinkled her nose. "Why is he telling me this?" Yun Ruhan frowned at Luo Yu, deep in thought. Shao Qi might not know, but he suddenly realized that what Yiaxuan said was not wrong. Yi Qingfeng indeed didn't want to chase after him and Shao Qi that badly. Otherwise, with his methods, it was impossible for his master to hide him and Shao Qi on the cultivation continent for more than 10 years. The reason why Phantom Sting and the others chased after them was because they were afraid that they would be executed if they didn't do their job well. Because the Lan Clan Empire's state preceptor Yi Qingfeng's ruthlessness was known by everyone. There was also Wei Guan and the rest. If Yi Qingfeng really wanted to kill them all, he had 100 ways to torture them right under his eyes, instead of throwing them into the rocky hill, which would give them a slim chance of survival. But so what? You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.